Um, you may wonder why a presentation, which is essentially about a de-expedition, is being given on a Thursday, because Thursday's about emergency communications. But I think you'll see some of the lessons that may be learned as a result of what happened on this trip. Um, just to give you a little background, I have participated in over 20 de-expeditions for working the CQ Worldwide DX contest, both phone and CW. And that usually means traveling to another part of the world and bringing some or all of the equipment with us, setting up a station and operating for the 48-hour period. So and the level of difficulty can vary from fly in and take an existing station and start operating to bringing absolutely everything with you. Here are some of the places we set up and operated. So these are some of the locations that I've operated from, and you can see it's a pretty wide range. We got 6 continents covered, 21 countries. And we've had pretty good success. We usually have pretty high scores, and the 3 of them were top world scores, and for our category, and 2 continental records at least. So where we are going today is the Gambia. Now, where is the Gambia? Well, it's in West Africa, pretty much the farthest west tip of West Africa. And if you see the longitudinal lines here, you see this is 0. This is basically the Greenwich 0 line. And here's the equator down here. Taking a closer look, the Gambia is basically, except for the ocean side, completely surrounded by Senegal. Now, Senegal was a French possession until it became independent. The Gambia was a British possession, one of the few in Africa, until it became independent. Now, you look at this map. This is a very strange shaped map for a country. It looks more like when my doctor sat me down and told me about the colonoscopy. But here's why it's the shape it is. The British concluded that they could only claim what they could defend. And as their boats went up the river, the farthest they could shoot in either direction basically created the borders. Kind of unusual, but that's how it works. So we are going to be in Banjul, which is the capital of the Gambia. Now, this occurred before the great reduction in luggage weights. So we were allowed 2 70-pound bags apiece. And when you are bringing everything with you, you have to be pretty careful about weighing everything. I have a triple beam O-House scale that weighs down to the gram. And so I weighed everything from luggage straps to radios to cables to tubes, headsets, foot switches, everything, little adapters, everything got weighed and put into this spreadsheet. And then I would just push things over into one case or the other to determine, until I got, as you see, very close to the 70 pounds. We did the same for the antennas, by the way, using SKB golf club cases, which have an interior dimension of about 4 feet, which allows you to take antennas that have been broken down into 4-foot lengths and pack them in. In 2 of those cases, we had full-size vertical for 80, loaded vertical for 160, and vertical dipole arrays, which is a driven element and a reflector for 40, 20, 15, and 10. And the cases just came in just barely underweight. And I've followed this spreadsheet process since then. Of course, the limits are now 50 pounds instead of 70 pounds. So it becomes even more critical to weigh everything. It also is kind of helpful to remember how things go back in the case when it's time to go home. So our esteemed director, Dick Norton, N6AA, arranged for the flights. And of course, since you can save a little bit of money by paying cash up front, he paid cash up front. Uh, we got our licenses from the ministry over there. We figured out what equipment we were taking. The antennas were provided by Tom Schiller, N6BT, who at the time was the founder and owner of Force 12 antennas. And now he has BT antennas. He sold Force 12. And Tom was very gracious. He had a full set of these verticals and vertical dipoles made up for us. He bought the brand new cases, got them all packed up with instructions and hardware and everything. Dick drove up to meet him and came back with these 2 cases full of antennas. So this is pretty good. Now these antennas have an interesting characteristic. They have an almost 180-degree pattern from, toward the driven element. And so, but in order to have that and to have the gain, they have to be very, very close to salt water. I mean, like within a quarter wavelength. So you have to be basically right on the beach to be able to use them. But when you look at a great circle map of Africa, you find that the US is over here at 10 o'clock, Europe's straight up, Japan's over here at 2 o'clock. So you don't really have much to the south that you have to worry about. So this kind of 180-degree pattern is perfect. So far, so good. Well, then we started seeing some news. Ghana Airways had lost its maintenance contract with Alitalia that maintains its planes because it hadn't paid its bill for a long time. And so the aircraft lost their airworthiness certificates, and it was concluded that they may be operating illegally or unsafely. So we thought, oh goodness, what's happening here? We never really got any explanation from the airline. So on a leap of faith, we hadn't heard that the flights were canceled. So we all flew to Baltimore, and we got to the Ghana Airways ticket counter, and they said, yes, you have a flight, but you'll have to wait. The shiny dome there is the late Phil Getz, N6ZZ, was one of our ace operators. So we sat and waited and waited and waited. And finally they said, okay, you have a flight. So we went to take a look out the window. Well, that's funny. There are no markings on that plane. Kind of a spook plane, all white. But we ended up going around another spot where we could look at the tail numbers, and we found it had a VE set of tail numbers. Well, those of you who DX, you know what that means. It's a Canadian plane. And in fact, Ghana Airlines had chartered this Canadian plane so that it would fill the routes that it had and it wouldn't lose its landing space in the various cities that it stopped in. So as it turns out, we had a Canadian crew. The flight went very, very well, and stepped off the plane, and it was like getting into a sauna. And we were in that sauna for almost 2 weeks. Now, since we had brought so much, the usual taxis, one taxi wouldn't nearly carry what we had, nor would 2, nor would 3, nor would 4. We had 6 taxis lined up. And they took us eventually to the operating location. Now, between the airport and our operating location, there's a nice wide freeway. And the problem is, the only person that can use the freeway is the country's president. Everybody else has to take the side roads. And on those side roads are young armed men with machine guns and so on. And they stop to query who you are, what you're doing, and possibly to extract some form of payment. Our taxi driver managed to get us through those without incident, but it was rather nerve-wracking for me, at least. So we finally arrived at Radio Sid. What's Radio Sid? Well, it's a former pirate AM radio station owned by a Swedish couple. And some years ago, the main tower had collapsed in a storm, and it was never rebuilt. So Radio Sid was off the air, but there it was right on the water and with multiple rooms, and we had permission to use it. So we thought, okay, let's make the best of it. You see the taxis all coming in and lining up there as we unload our gear. So we started putting antennas together. Now these, again, these were from Force 12 at the time, and they'd never been assembled before, so we had to follow the instructions fairly carefully, and none of us had actually built them before. But it's actually not too hard to do. They went together pretty well, and within a couple of days, we had 6 working antennas ready to go. You can see here as we start to install antennas, the water's right on the other side of the rocks. Here's part of the collapsed tower that used to be Radio SID. Oh, I should mention too that when I arrived, we had to go through customs, of course, and I had a 500-foot spool of RG8X. Now, the customs folks looked at that and said, "Oh, that's pretty valuable. You're going to have to pay a couple of $100 of duty on that." And I said, "But it's going back out of the country." "Well, you still have to pay duty. Of course, you can leave it here for your duration." No, we got to use it. And no, he was going to get something out of us. So fortunately, Phil, who had the communication with the ministry, had sent all of us copies of the letter of authority to operate from the Minister of Communications. And I made a point of printing that letter out and having it with me. So I pulled it out and showed him where their Ministry of Communications said, "You should have no problem getting all your gear through customs." So this fellow took the letter and went back behind the counter and looked at it and grumbled for a while. And finally he said, "Okay, you can go." So documentation is important. We know that from emergency communications. It's also important in this case. So we start putting these things up. Now, for the lower bands, or the higher bands rather, 10, 15, and so on, it basically looks like 2 aluminum poles. These are vertical dipole arrays, which means it's like a driven element from a 10-meter beam turned on its side. And one end is made a little thicker and a little shorter, and the other is a little thinner and a little longer so that it tapers. And then you have an insulating section at the bottom, stick it in the sand, and put a few lines around it to guide it, and you have a vertical dipole. Now you take another one, but this one is shorted in the back and it's a little bit longer, and it becomes a reflector. You put that in the sand on an insulator, and now you have a 2-element Yagi pointed out toward the water. I'll tell you, these things work amazingly well. Tom did a phenomenal job with them. By the way, that's our director, Dick Norton, N6A up there doing the high work, and Terry, K6JL, then I think he was W6MKB, doing the groundwork. And we tried them out a few times. The ones with little cross arms are for 40 and 20, and we were getting great signal reports. This was looking very, very promising. What can go wrong? Well, okay, first, nice break for a meal. Well, the restaurants, of course, get their food from the local food stands, like this, where the fish sit out unrefrigerated. Well, a couple of our folks didn't feel so well after that dinner, so we had a couple of cases of food poisoning. They both survived and recovered and continued working in a day or two. The fellow in the hat is Henrik, SM0JHF. Henrik, he's a Polish ham, but with a licensed in Sweden. And as far as we know, he's the only other ham in the country. And he was there as kind of a caretaker for the location for the Swedish owners. And he's pointing out something. What is he pointing out? A big slurry line. And it turns out, because the ocean comes right up to the highway, and they had multiple cases of highway washout, the government, in its wisdom, decided, well, the best way to solve that is to move the beach. So they were slurrying in sand from elsewhere, and then using caterpillars to spread it out. And as we watched them do this work, this is, we'd gotten there about a little over a week before the contest, and every day the beach got farther and farther and farther away. Now, remember, I said these vertical dipoles need to be right near the water. And originally they were, and that's how much coax we brought with us. And as they got farther and farther away, the amount of coax we were going to need started to exceed the amount we brought with us. So they basically had to go to the point where they filled the beach above those stakes. So it kept going out and out and out. And finally, we were there. We didn't know what was going to happen. So we went ahead and, well, let's get set up anyway. Phil is setting up the network so that the logging computers can talk to one another. Meanwhile, we were kind of getting the station set up, had amps plugged in and so on. And all of a sudden, I had a fan going on me because it was really hot during the day. And we smell smoke. And the fan starts going crazy, like it's going to take off and run down the runway. Well, their 220 voltage got higher and higher and higher, and it happened very quickly. And before we could do anything, poof, our laptop supplies blew. I always wonder what those little triangle striations were for in the top of a capacitor. We found out. MOV's blown. There's one of those capacitors that's kind of opened up from the pressure. Not only that, the supplies for the radios went booey. Burned up MOVs. Now, Art Goddard, W6XD, now a silent key, was known for bringing spare parts. And he had what he called Radio Shack in a suitcase. And this thing was probably 65 pounds by itself. But he had MOVs and all sorts of other things. But many of these supplies were not salvageable. They just had too much damage to them. Not only that, we had to come up with an alternate source. So it was almost closing time on Friday in Banjul. No radio stores, of course. So I said, well, why don't we get some car batteries? Find an auto parts store. So we did that. This is a young man named Fode who was interested in radio, and we kind of showed him what we were doing and taught him some things as we went along. So we got the batteries, put the distilled water in them, got a couple of chargers and started charging them up. Now the contest starts at midnight. So this was kind of a hurry up job. So we placed batteries around each station, and the stations were all in different rooms. And then we had the chargers and moved the chargers from one battery to another to get them all kind of filled up. As far as the power supplies for the computers, we just basically took the end of where the supply itself has a cable going out to the computer. We just cut it off, stripped it, and strapped it to the battery terminals. You say, oh, wait a minute. Laptop computers run on 18 volts. Well, the supplies are 18 volts, but that's so it can charge the battery. And if you look at most of your laptop batteries, they're more like 10 or 12 volts. So yes, they will run on 12 volts. That's not what they were designed for, but it works. So we found that workaround. So we got the logging computers and the radios going. Well, that's fine. What about the amplifiers? Well, this is one of them, the SB 220 that was going to be used on 40 meters. Heinrich and Dick looking on. We have John, K6AM, who happens to be a broadcast station engineer. And he's looking at this amp, and we figure out that basically the filter capacitors all blew up because of the high voltage. Now what? Testing. He found the failure. Now what? Hey, wait a minute. He got an idea. This used to be an old broadcast station. So we started digging through the boneyard, and guess what we came up with? A nice big old filter capacitor. Well, of course, it won't fit in the case. You know what? That's okay. We can operate with the case off, which is what we did. So leads going down, high voltage. OSHA would not approve of this, but we made it work. And Art, of course, is the operator with the biggest feet in the whole place. So we had to make sure he kept his shoes on and kept his feet under the desk. And nobody was killed in this process. So we made that work. So we've kind of taken care of the radios. We've kind of taken care of the computers kind of taking care of the amplifiers, at least those that we could repair. So we're about 12 hours to go in the contest. They're finally leaving. It looks like the beach is finished. So, all right. So now we have to put the cable, string the cables out. Now the 500 feet of LMR 400 we brought was supposed to be enough for all 6 antennas. Now it was only enough for 1.5. So of course, the one with the highest loss would be 10 meters. So we strung as much as we could for 10 meters to get it out there at the water's edge. And then we started scrounging Cat V coax and whatever else we could find for the other antennas. It was very makeshift. And of course, the last one and the farthest away was 160. And of course, because the losses are lowest on 160, I got, I don't know what it was. I mean, it was junk cable, almost like zip cord, but we ran it out there and made it work. So, okay, now we have to put the antennas back up where we think they belong. And we lug rocks from hunks of concrete to kind of tie down the verticals, again, just using nylon thread and some rocks that we wrap with this thread, and that kind of holds the antennas up. They're not very heavy, fortunately. So we figure out about where the water edge is, and we start putting things up. You can see the feed point right here in the middle, again, vertical dipole. But notice the caterpillar tracks all over it. I mean, this is freshly minted soil. The problem was we didn't know exactly where high tide was going to be. We'd find that out later the hard way. So about 7 hours to go now, and we had a huge windstorm. I just, like a supercell comes through, and we look out and all the antennas are flopped down in the water. So go back out there, take them one by one back to the building, hose off the salt, and put them up again. So back we go. And as I said, we had to guess where high tide was, and we hope we guessed right. And as I say, famous last words. 1 hour to go. The main starting operators had gone to their hotel room, which has air conditioning, to get a little sleep before the contest started. And we looked out, check on things, and all our antennas were missing. Well, we guessed wrong on high tide, and they were all washed out into the sea. And of course, it had to be a moonless night. So there were the flashlights and whatever we could do, fishing around. I brought my, I brought some water shoes so that we could tromp around in the water safely. And we felt around in the dark, finding pieces of antennas, pulling them out, back up to the building where we could hose them off with fresh water, build them again in the dark, put them up in the dark. So midnight, just before midnight and the contest start, our operators come rolling around. Oh, are we all ready to go? And those of us who stayed back and fixed all this stuff just about pounced on them. I mean, this was a mess, but again, we just keep going out, finding what we could, rinse it, put it back up, and hope it works. Oops. All right, so finally we're on the air. I was assigned 160, which from there should be really good because Europe's right north of you. But I have my transceiver, but my amp isn't there. Where's my amp? Well, my amp's over on the 80 meter station because the 80 meter amp was irretrievably broken as a result of the power surges. And we all concluded, well, he's likely to make more contacts and more mults on 80 than 160. So my amp was sacrificed for the 80 meter station. Now, what does that leave me doing? It leaves me calling people with spaghetti string coax or whatever we ended up using for a feed line and 100 watts. And I'm competing against all the big guys. Basically, I could hear people, but they can't hear me. Well, this doesn't work well. I mean, there are obviously great multipliers there to be had. So what do? Do you give up and say, well, I can't work anybody, forget 160? No. What can you do? I grab a piece of paper and I start at the bottom of the band and I start logging every call I hear and every channel, every frequency that they're on. And then when John takes a bio break, I run over there, turn off the amp, unhook it, grab it. Now this is a 70-pound Alpha 78. Run it around the building to my room, hook it up, and I start nailing those guys one by one at all the stations that I had and checking them off my list. And as soon as John comes back, I turn it off, unhook the amp, carry it back to the other station, get it back on 80, and we keep going. And this is how it went all night. It was enough for me to work some contacts and some multipliers, enough to contribute to the score, but it was not the easy way to go. Terry K6JL also did some work on 80 meters, and that was a very busy band. I was on 160, but then I tried to get some sleep, but it's very hot and there are all sorts of mosquitoes around there. So I said, you know what? Let me see if Phil N6ZZ needs a break. He was running 10 meters. So I did, and I went and worked on 10 meters. And my gosh, you would have thought those two little aluminum sticks were stacks of Yagis. The pileups were incredible. I had the rate meter up over 300 an hour. They just kept coming, and it was phenomenal. I also, Dick Norton took a break midday on 20 meters. Now, in most places in the world, when you're on 20 meters, there's kind of a doldrums in the middle of the day. You don't have a lot to work. So that was an appropriate time for Dick to take a break. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to at least listen. And I caught shortly an opening to Japan. So I dusted off my college Japanese and started running the pileup in Japanese, area by area, with just a few each time and moving on, and then stopping for the non-JAs. And this went on for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And as best I can tell, I worked the band out, all the JAs that were calling. We eventually got them all, and there were hundreds and hundreds. So that was fun. So what else could go wrong? Oh, we had a solar flare, and that took place Sunday, early Sunday. Well, that's just what you need if you're trying to work from the US to Europe or various other places. But you remember that great circle map I talked to you about, that 180-degree pattern right along here? Well, there's the US over here. There's all the Caribbean. There's Europe. There's Japan. We don't have to go through the solar flare. And we were getting reports from the US stations that we were the only DX station they could hear. So press on, keep contacting. So what happened? We kept working these guys and working them and working them. And in the end, we checked out on 3830, roughed up our score, and it turns out we had beat everybody. We were the top multi in the world with everything that went wrong, because we kept working around it. We kept finding ways to do something different. You notice 160 was not very significant, 72 contacts, but 41 countries in 11 zones. So there's 50 mults right there. And look at our top band, 10 meters. Was it because we had Phil as a super operator? Partly. Was it because 10 meters happened to be hot? Partly. Was it because 10 meters got the only good piece of coax? Very probably. But I mean, look at these country counts on the 40 through 10, 120, 140, 150, 130, 37 zones, 35 zones, 38 zones. You know, for what's basically a field day style operation where you bring everything, set it up, and it keeps getting knocked down, you keep putting it together. We did pretty well, and we were very, very pleased. All the sacrifice was worth it. So what can we learn in MCOM from this? Quite a bit, as it turns out. Here's our crew, by the way. There's Fode, who hung around, and again, we were showing him stuff, and we got K6AM and myself, K6JL, there's Dick, and N6AA, OH2KI Jorma from Finland, Art Goddard, and of course, and Phil Getz. AB6BH, John Fenolio, is from San Diego. John is a friend of Terry's and really great guy to have along. He's quiet, he's calm, he's a really good teacher for, you know, the young folks who are interested in radio. All a great ambassador for ham radio all the way around. And then Larry K5OT, and there's Heinrich back there. So some of the things we learned. First, plan your supplies using what we call the whole station concept. I've applied this to field day for many years. Instead of somebody bringing all the antennas and somebody bringing all the radios and somebody bringing all the power supplies, each station needs a band captain, for lack of a better term. And that band captain needs to know that everything is there and where it's coming from. Now, it doesn't mean he or she has to supply everything, but it means that he or she has to know where it's coming from and preferably have it physically accounted for before the trip leaves. And that's everything from the antenna to the coax, to any filters, to the radio, to the power supply, the mic cables, or the keyers if you're doing CW. Everything the station may need, the logging computer, the software, and make sure that it's complete. And by assigning that responsibility, it's less likely that something's going to get left behind. Second, you need to have at least a minimal amount of test equipment. You know, we're fortunate that our equipment actually has a lot of test stuff built in these days, but less so back when we were doing this. And the the availability of test gear off the shelf is negligible in some of these places. So you have to have it with you. You have to be able to open things up, look, see what's going on, maybe replace a part or two, or reseat a board, or whatever you have to do. Make sure you bring enough tools to make those basic repairs. Make sure you have the right the screwdriver tips to open something that has hex screws in it, or whatever it may be. You should know your equipment and preferably bring the manuals. I've tried to make a practice of having the manuals for my equipment on the logging computer, so that I can, or at least on a disk or a flash drive or something, so that if we have to dig into the manual, we have it with us. That's come in handy on more than one occasion. You have to have a plan B, or make a plan B, and even a plan C. They may not be optimal, but again, we've gone all this way, spent all this money, gone to all this work. When things go south, just saying, well, I give up and go home isn't an option. It just is. You're not going to do that. Well, the same is really true in emergency communication. Things may not go the way you want, but that's one of the reasons we're hams. We look for ways to get around a problem, either fix it, analyze it and fix it, or analyze it, give it a decent burial, and come up with another plan. One way or the other, we are going to be on the air. It may not be pretty, but it'll work. So if you can't do it all, do what you can. And in this case, it all paid off. And those are the kinds of lessons that I have found really help in subsequent de-expeditions, in field days, in drills, in deployments, whatever it may be. We have more than one way to make something happen. And as hams, part of our skill and part of our responsibility is to make it happen no matter what. So with that, I will say thank you. I will close the screen share, and let's go back to see if we have some questions or comments. Everybody stunned?
Hello.
I have a question.
Hi, Loretta. Go ahead.
Should I go ahead and put it in chat, since it might be kind of noisy in here?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, no, it's okay. If you were to do this again, considering the weight restrictions, what changes would you make in your equipment? Like, you said it went from 70 pounds to 50 pounds. I'm not even sure it's 50 pounds anymore, and I'm not sure
It is, including the case in most cases. Okay, good question though. What would we do differently? Well, first, the radios we were using at the time were typically big, heavy desktop radios. Mine was the TS 930, into which I'd installed several Fox Tango filters and so on. It was a very good performing radio, still is, but it's 55 or 60 pounds. And we tried to do that as carry on. So what we would do now, and what we have done since about 2008, is most of us all acquired Elecraft K3s. And the K3 is a very high performance radio, excellent for multi-operator situations because it's both a robust receiver and a clean transmitter. And so, and my K3 weighs about 8 pounds. So there we've knocked about 40 some pounds off the load. The next thing is the amplifiers. We used to I would bring my Alpha 78 everywhere, which had about a 45 pound or 50 pound transformer, which I took out and put in one suitcase. And then the body of the thing, we filled the cavity with clothes and whatever, and that was in the other suitcase. Well, we don't do that anymore. We now use solid state amplifiers for the most part, such as the Expert Linear 1.3K and 1.5K. I also subsequently acquired about a 700 watt class amplifier from a ham in Finland, in fact, and it's the Tokyo High Power Labs HL550. Now that weighs about 20 pounds. The Expert Linear with the tuner, which turns out to be very handy also, weighs about 25 pounds. So there's 2 amps, 45 pounds instead of 1 amp being 70 pounds. Antennas, I had made big chokes, if you will, for matching the antennas to the coax and keeping the RF off the coax. But that uses rows of big ferrites, and that's kind of heavy. So what I did more recently is I used some PVC drain pipe, 4-inch drain pipe, and I wrapped the specified number of turns around. So for example, 24 turns for 80 meters and 12 turns for 40, 6 turns for 20, and so on. And so now it's just a little extra coax and a few ounces of plastic. So we've cut that way back. So those are the kinds of things we did. Also, we don't bring the same level of spare parts and test equipment. We have to bring a few things, but we keep it to the minimum we think we'll need. So those are the main changes. And of course, to the extent you use suitcases, if you get lighter suitcases, I took one case and I stripped all the lining and everything else out of it, so it's just the bare case. Take a pound or 2 off there. That's the sort of thing changes we've made since then, since the good old days, if you will. Good question. Others?
Do you plan on doing that again soon or anytime?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been continuing to do those since the Gambia. Of course, COVID stopped a lot of the travel for a while. I was able to go and operate WPX last weekend, and that was in Hawaii. That was actually at the station that used to be my home on the North Shore of Oahu with a group of other hams. So I didn't have to bring anything except a set of headphones. We all had our own headphones and mics, just as part of the COVID protocol. But the one before that was to Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. And between Olaf and I, we brought all the antennas, and I brought 2 amplifiers this time. Other folks brought radios and computers. So again, we divvied it up and managed to get there. So yeah, we definitely want to do more.
I'm jealous. You're lucky. But thank you for sharing. That was interesting. Yeah, I'm jealous.
All right.
Good evening,
Anybody else?
Victor.
Victor.
KI7 Mike Zulu out of here at Washington. You just talking about the headphones and microphones of the COVID protocol. I'm very much into or trapped in handhelds. When you're talking base stations, the big stuff, what are we talking about for jacks? Are we talking RCA jacks, or are we talking proprietary jacks for different receivers?
It varies with the radio. The older radios used most of them, the Yaesu, Kenwood, ICOM, and Elecraft use the 8-pin round connector that you've seen on so many radios. The only difference is that those the manufacturers couldn't agree on which standard, and everyone thought they'd have their own standard. So all three of them had different pinouts. However, the Elecraft went with the Kenwood standard. Now, since since the microphones, you don't want to rewire your mics and your headsets. So what we do is usually either make or buy adapters that will take the standard, like the Heil type input with a 3.5 millimeter a tip sleeve, a plug for the microphone, and a 3.5 millimeter tip ring sleeve for the audio, and a quarter inch socket for the or a quarter inch plug for the push to talk or a foot switch. And it takes those inputs and converts them to the 8-pin round. So I have adapters for ICOM, I have adapters for Yaesu, I have adapters for Kenwood. So you take the same headset and plug it into whatever. Now, more recently, radios aren't unnecessarily using those anymore. The K3s and also some of the accessory boxes, like the micro ham boxes that many contest stations use, will take the 1/8 inch input directly from a microphone, either in the back panel or in an accessory box or something. And then the headphones will go into a standard quarter inch jack in the front with an adapter, or with the directly in on the back into a phone's jack. The push to talk on many of these is an RCA, and that again, you can adapt. Most of our foot switches were designed with quarter inch plugs on the end, just because that's what the old adapters used to take. But you get a quarter inch to RCA adapter, and then you can plug it into the back. Having a few adapters handy, there's another lesson, I guess, for MCOM. You may find yourself having to use somebody else's equipment, and you should be able to adapt one version of an audio interface to another. And having a few of these back and forths can really allow you the flexibility of using the say the headphones and mic that you're used to, and fit into almost anybody's radio. Does that answer the question? I guess.
It does. Thank you very much.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, Dan, I guess that's it, unless there's something in chat, which I can't see.
Tom, you want to ask your question?
Oh, another tornado warning. Oh, hope you guys are safe there, Tom. You asked what was our source of sustenance? You mean food? I guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't eat much during the contest. Usually people would, they'd bring loaves of bread and so on. I've actually gotten to the point where I do occasional 24-hour fasts, so that if I have to go without food for a while, my body doesn't think it's anything unusual. And but you can bring fairly concentrated stuff. It also varies a little whether it's a phone contest or a CW contest. A phone contest, you have to get stuff down quickly so you don't stop too much. But I will typically bring some raw nuts, like Brazil nuts, almonds, walnuts, and so on. you could always throw some raisins in there or some other, I'll bring some, dried meat or whatever. And so, you can get along with just a few snacks for a while. Usually folks will go and get, a lot of the guys will go and get, the chips and cookies and junk food. I try to stay away from that because it doesn't do my operating any good to feel, sugar highs and sugar lows. I've tried to stay off that stuff completely. So that, my choice is a little different than theirs. Now, most of these places, there are restaurants somewhere. Okay. And if you go to one that doesn't use the day old sushi, you can get things that are well cooked and local meats and so on are usually okay. So we'll typically have a few restaurant meals during the course of the week. Other than that, we'll hit grocery stores or whatever we can get and get things that are packaged or canned that make them fairly safe to eat.
What about
Now-
survival rations or MREs?
Haven't tried those. Now in Mauritius, we didn't have that problem because the place we rented came with the services of two very nice local ladies who not only clean the house every day, but also they provided two freshly cooked meals, a big breakfast and then a late lunch, such that we didn't really have to worry about dinner. And these were delicious. They were both of, I think, of Indian heritage. So there was a lot of Indian flavoring in the cooking, which I was very happy with. And so we ate extremely well there. Less so in some other places, but nobody has ever starved to death on a trip. Let's put it that way. But I do advise, practice going without, stretch your non-eating time. I mean, you don't finish your, stop eating at 10 o'clock at night and start again at 6 in the morning. Stop at 5 or 6 and then delay your breakfast. Stretch it out to 12, 15, 18 hours. And you'll find that you can do that after a while. You can do it without much trouble. And then it doesn't become this body panic as to, oh God, I've got to eat or I'm going to fall apart. No, you don't. I got 24, 36 hours without eating and I felt fine.
What about drinkable water?
Drinkable water. We have always been very careful. Some places, the water was great and we didn't have to worry about it. I mean, obviously Hawaii, all that stuff filtered through lava rock, no chlorine, no nothing, and it's delicious. Croatia, when we were there, not only in the town, but traveling through the countryside, everywhere we went, water out of the tap was safe and delicious. Most other places, we stocked up on bottled water where we can. These days, I'm bringing a water filter or two so that we can filter the water. When you brush your teeth, you brush it with bottled water. It's really funny when the only stuff you can get is the carbonated, and you brush your teeth and rinse with that, and you look like a mad dog foaming at the mouth. But and of course, if you have to worry about water, you also have to worry about uncooked fruits and vegetables that had been washed in the water. So you usually end up peeling or otherwise removing the outer layer of whatever the food was you were going to eat. Of course, once you've boiled it, if you're cooking something, that pretty well takes care of whatever pathogens may be in there. Other questions? Okay, I guess that's it. Well, thank you.
Well, no, thank you very much. That was a good one, Marty.
It was different.
Okay. There's a thumbs up from Larry. I don't see anything else here. Cover my back, Barry. Do we have anything on chat?
Everything is good, but Tom just makes a comment to watch out for high altitude boiling.
Oh yeah, high altitude because water boils at a lower temperature at higher altitudes. Fortunately, most of our stuff is near the water, which means we're at sea level almost all the time, or we're as close to sea level as we can get.
Did you ever do any?
Dan, go ahead.
Did you ever do any fishing or anything non-amateur while you're on those trips?
No, we didn't do fishing. For one thing, you've got to bring all the gear with you, and we had enough stuff to bring. We have done a fair amount of sightseeing on some of these trips. I mean, when we operated from the Galapagos, we went back to Ecuador, and then we got into Peru and Lima, and we actually went to Machu Picchu and stayed overnight there and climbed in the ruins. So yeah, we've done some nice sightseeing, and when everywhere we go, where possible, we cooperate with the local hams. We don't want to come in being the so-called the pros from Dover, and just bulldoze everybody. So we try and work with them and talk with them ahead of time and get them involved in the operation to the extent possible. We couldn't do that in the Gambia because other than Heinrich as a caretaker, there were no hams. There were no ham stores. There was nobody to work with. But ordinarily, we're working with some of the local folks, and they tend to be better educated than the average person. And so we end up learning a lot about the local, how things really work, not like what you'd learn as a tourist, but how things really work, the economy, the politics, all that stuff. And it's really very informative, and you get an appreciation for what life is like in a lot of these places, and thereby an even greater appreciation for what we've got at home.
Okay.
Barry, you had something?
Nope, I'm good. Everything is good in the chat, Dan.
All righty. Well, we're gonna wrap it up here just a couple of minutes early there. And another great presentation. Marty, be sure to send me your slides. And without that, I want to say 73s, everybody. We'll see you next go around.
All righty, everybody.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Great stuff, Marty. 7-3.
Thanks a lot. Good night.
We'll see you.